Suffering.
How I feel every Monday morning.
Not that one, the video game.
So The Sims then. Okay, so when I make my character wake up early for work.
No, not that one either. I'm talking about the one where you play a prisoner on death row and you must go through an emotional, yet very fun adventure through the American prison system.
I am just going to play some Doom. At least there I don't have to be emotionally stressed out. Bye guys.
Ah, the things I do for the fans. Well, ladies and gentlemen, The Suffering is indeed an apt title for the type of game we're taking a look at today. Now, before we get into the game proper, we are of course going to follow its developmental cycle and see how it came to be. The Suffering was developed by Surreal Software and published by Midway. The concept for the game itself actually dates back to 2002, when Surreal Software's game designer Richard Rouse III drafted a 2-page pitch that described a stylized horror shooter. The basic idea for the game originated from Rouse's negative experience working on the cancelled game known as Gunslinger. Essentially, while he liked the morality system the game had, he felt that it was too ambitious for its own good, and that the tech of the time could never have handled such an advanced system. But from this failed attempt, he was inspired to create the more reasonable morality system in The Suffering. Early inspiration for The Suffering also came from the horror film The Shining. Rouse liked its intense atmosphere and the fact that it was a more cerebral horror film. Rouse wanted the game to not be a standard survival horror game, rather he wanted it to be closer to an action game. He wanted the player character to also be a complete mystery as well, and only imply his strength and martial prowess. Rouse also states that he wanted to stay away from zombies and other generic monsters, and actually create something unique, hence why the monsters in the game all come from execution methods and are not just snarly, generic beasties that we have seen 1,000 times before. Oh, but it gets even better than that, lads and lasses. You see, the initial creature design would then be sent over to Stan Winston Studios, where they would then be Stan Winstonized. Rouse wanted to take it a step further. He knew that creepy monsters would not nearly be enough to truly scare the audience, and thus he tied them into real-world events and concepts such as prison life, slavery, and real, not social justice racism. As far as gameplay went, Rouse wanted to have the game empower the player and give them the freedom to determine the main character's morality. The developers even spent time determining what kind of control scheme that they would use, and eventually went with the now standard double analog stick control scheme. Now, of course, we're looking at the PC version with the keyboard and mouse, but these controls still work quite well indeed. They initially wanted to use a target lock system, but determined that it was too disconnecting. The game would be unveiled on March 17th, 2003. It would officially be announced to the public on April 15th of that same year. In September of 2003, there was an announcement of a delay, and the release date was pushed back from October 2003 to early 2004. Rouse states that it was rather fortuitous and that it gave them time to actually make the game even better than it was initially. But wait, the story gets even better. Midway Games actually hosted a promotional event for The Suffering at an actual penitentiary, West Pennsylvania Penitentiary to be exact. And the gaming press was invited to spend the night there and play the demo in the cafeteria. Initially, the game was supposed to be released on the Xbox, PS2, GameCube, and PC. The GameCube version would be cancelled due to that console's limited market share at that time. The game itself would be released across all the various platforms on the single holiest day of the year. The Suffering would be released on the 23rd of February 2004, and as we all know, ladies and gentlemen, the 23rd of February is the single holiest day of the year because that is the year that the mighty general chose to grace the world with his mighty presence. The game would be a commercial success, selling 1.5 million copies, and it would put Midway back on the map, at that time at least. Now today, we are taking a look at the PC version, and this version would later be released as freeware by the US Air Force for whatever reason. Sadly, it would be taken down at an indeterminate time. I got my copy at a garage sale for 25 cents. Gotta love those garage sales. So now, let's enter the world of survival horror once again and take a look at The Suffering.
The gameplay for The Suffering is that of a third-person shooter. Or is it? Oh, ladies and gentlemen, all you must do if you so choose is hit the Control button and it will put you in a first-person perspective. And you can play the entire game in a first-person perspective, and it works fairly well.
Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen. The developers of this game actually give you the option to switch between first and third-person perspectives. Really, these days, if such a thing were to happen, the first-person perspective would be $50 Day 1 DLC.
Now, for the purposes of this review, we're primarily going to be playing it in the third person. As a third-person game, it is a classical one with the camera behind the back, which, to be perfectly honest, I actually find myself preferring to the Resident Evil 4 over-the-shoulder camera system. I feel that the behind-the-back camera allows you to see more of the screen and less of the player character's back, which, while usually well-modeled, is, shall we say, a bit boring. You have access to numerous weapons in the game, from the humble shiv to the devastating Tommy gun, and each weapon is fairly useful in its own right. As this was a game designed around player empowerment, you have plenty of bullets for your various bullet shooters. As you would expect, I find the shotty to be one of the best weapons in the game, as it can drop enemies in just a few hits. The default keyboard controls are quite excellent, and one of the weirder keys to use is the Alt key for opening doors. At first, I thought it was utterly insane, but damn if it didn't work well. The PC port for the game in general is also quite well done, with numerous graphical options and the ability to rebind controls, and despite being from 2004, it still runs great on Windows 7. However, to get the sounds to work exactly correct, you will need to download a sound library so that the sounds will play correctly, otherwise you may have some sound issues.
Now, one of the coolest aspects of the gameplay is the ability to have your player character transform into Demon Hulk!
Yes, indeed, your character has the ability to turn into Demon Hulk! As you kill more monsters, you increase your insanity bar, and when it starts flashing, you can turn into Demon Hulk. You have increased damage resistance and can kill just about anything in a few hits. However, when you Hulk out, you start losing health, and if you stay Hulked out too long, you will die. So you really have to choose your Hulkinator moments wisely.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is player empowerment. In this game, your insanity meter turns you into Demon Hulk. In Amnesia: The Dark Descent, that insanity meter just kills you.
You can regain health by finding pills, and there are usually a bunch of them scattered about the level. So you are never really hurting for health. You then have a flashlight, because all games from this era had one, and I honestly never used it that much, as the game was never all that dark. You then of course have the grenade weapons like TNT, and they work well for crowd control. Graphically, the game looks decent enough. I won't try and say that they have not aged over the years, and as this was a 2004 game, they still did not look all that good even then. But the gameplay and the story and the levels all make up for that. And the creature design is second to none, as the guys at Stan Winston Studios did an absolutely amazing job on the monsters. The creature design also helps in the creepiness as well. Now on to the sound. It is excellent, and all the monsters all sound quite scary. Not because they have scary snarls or anything like that, but because their sound design is more subdued. The weapons also sound pretty bloody good as well, and the guns actually sound more realistic than stylized. The voice acting is what I call TV show level. But that being said, the line deliveries are all consistent, meaning you don't have one good actor and 20 bad ones. Rather, you have everyone sound decent right across the board. Music for the game is pretty bloody good as well, and it has a very industrial sound, which is very fitting for the overall setting.
And now, let's take a look at the story.
The story for The Suffering and overall concept is nothing short of amazing. In the game, you play as Torque. And yes, I will dispense with the obvious joke of calling him Mr. Wrench. Torque is in prison because it is thought that he has murdered his family in a fit of rage, and thus he is now on death row. When he arrives on death row, weird things start happening, and eventually the prison comes under attack from paranormal entities. The game keeps these events rather vague, with one individual just saying they are what they are.
And that, of course, is far more effective than just saying they're space griblets from Planet X. The unknown is always far more scary.
This game has a great deal of player empowerment, but it does this to show that even though Torque is a very strong character, he still has to deal with things that cannot be fought with mere firearms. This is a game that shows that horror is something that you might not necessarily be able to fight. So while Torque can shoot enemies with wild abandon, he has to deal with problems on a different level entirely. The enemies that he must face on this other level are actually more mental and emotional rather than physical. Torque has a great many inner demons that are much harder to fight than the physical ones. Really, Torque can shoot or kill or bludgeon anything, but he can't control his own mind. He can't just bludgeon his own memories. And that's where this game really shines. Torque is constantly having to fight his own inner demons, as he has had an extremely difficult life. And you see him having flashbacks to his dead wife and to his kids all throughout the game, and these are some of the most intense moments of the game. This game is a psychological horror game in addition to being an absolutely excellent action game. This game gets into the player's head by showing you scary images, by actually using some restraint when it comes to scariness. A good example of which is the surveillance cameras. These surveillance cameras are found all throughout the game, and whenever you look into one, sometimes you don't see something, and then sometimes you do. And whenever you do see something, it's usually pretty bloody disturbing. As you would expect from an early 2000s game, there is of course a great deal of fluff, and this comes in two different varieties. You have one character explaining the various monsters, although they don't explain where they come from, and then you have another character explaining the prison itself and the various buildings that you must fight through. And these are actually fairly well voice acted and very well written. The overall plot for the game is fairly simple. Torque must escape from the prison before he is killed by the snarly griblets. But the game is so much more than that. The morality system plays a big role in the game, and how the morality system works is this. You will be given a choice to pull an object, push an object, shoot an enemy, or not shoot an enemy. And thankfully, the game does not turn these events into cutscenes or QTEs. For example, you see a correctional officer in a gas chamber. You have the choice to either kill him or let him live. At no time is there an on-screen prompt. Rather, it's just you and a switch. You will, of course, have Satan here telling you to kill him, or your dead wife telling you to let him live. This, of course, also comes into play with characters. For example, you have this individual here. You can either protect him from the snarly griblets, or you can just shoot him in the head. And, of course, Satan wants you to shoot him, your dead wife wants you to protect him. And that is really an important concept. You, the player, have a choice. You can choose to be good, or you can choose to be evil. You can also choose to be neutral and just not shoot him but not protect him either. And there are several endings in the game. If you are good and an actual, human being, you get the good ending. If you are evil and just kill everything in sight, you of course get the bad ending. And if you are neutral, well, you get the neutral ending, I suppose.
The game is also very even-handed when it discusses prison officials and convicts.
Neither the prisoners or correctional officers are shown as wholly good or wholly bad. There are, of course, some good COs and there are some bad COs. There are prisoners who are decent people but just fell afoul of the law, and prisoners who would kill you as soon as look at you. And the game presents a picture not often seen in gaming. It shows that the world can be less black and white and more along the lines of light gray and dark gray. Hell, the game is even-handed when it comes to the prison system in general, not saying if it is actually good or bad and leaving it up to the player to determine if prisons are actually good or if they are actually bad. It's really easy to see why this game put Midway Games back on the bloody map. This is an excellently written, excellently paced survival horror game that shows that in your survival horror games you can have a strong main character as long as you actually show that brawn and strength is not necessarily something that's going to serve you in good stead all the time.
And so that is The Suffering, ladies and gentlemen, a game that has unfairly been relegated to the mists of gaming history. Now, if you want to play this game, probably the easiest way is going to be the PlayStation 2 version, mainly because that's the cheapest one on eBay. And from what I've seen, it has more or less the same graphics as the PC version, just with a lower screen resolution. Now, really, this game definitely needs to be released on Steam and GOG. And this game definitely needs a graphical update at some point. It would be very nice if some enterprising fans would make one, and hopefully it will be made at some point in the future. And so, I am GeneralLotz, wishing you good The Suffering, The Ties That Bind, and good War Within, or whatever makes you happy.
If you enjoyed my review of The Suffering, please consider subscribing. If you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue bringing you these great reviews.